The Physicians, the Stolen Ones, Book 1, by Magdalene Dietchka. Prologue. Jacob, 17 years before present day. The landscape was littered with nature's destruction. Last night's storms matched Jacob Perlman's dark mood. He hated his rural middle school, and his freshman year sucked. Jake stared out of one of the closed bus windows at the downed limbs and flooded lawns. He was so sick of assholes destined to peak in high school and go nowhere in life. Getting shoved into lockers because he aced a test everyone else failed got old. Yeah, they called him a nerd, but his ambition forced him to be the best at everything that he did. He had to be. Being the son of two leading pharmaceutical researchers already placed pressure on him to achieve academic excellence. Jake would graduate in 3 years and could not wait to spend the new millennium away from here. The bus driver slowly wound his way down the road, cursing the school not so quietly for not closing due to the flooding and debris clogging the roads. Jake agreed with the old man. He didn't want to look at his schoolmates. The day had been rough enough already. Out of the corner of his eye, Jake saw shepherds near each student, which concerned him. The shepherds were humanoid, almost translucent, and glowed with a golden hue. They bore 2 wings on their back, and their hair flowed like fire. The creatures rarely stayed near their charges for long. He had always been able to see them and talk with them whenever he wanted, but no one else could. The shepherds had told him that they lived between the worlds of the living and the dead. When Jake was a child, his parents thought the shepherds were just imaginary friends. By the time Jake turned 10, he realized that adults became uncomfortable when he spoke to the shepherds or talked about them. His parents told him that he was too old for imaginary friends and took him to child psychologists. Jake quickly learned to shut up and limit his interactions with Omiel, his shepherd. Omiel was a constant presence in his life and taught him to cope with his abilities to see into the veil between worlds. Over time, Jake learned to block out the shepherds as just another part of the terrain. But if he focused, he witnessed them appearing and briefly following their charges. Today, every student on the bus had a shepherd near them, another reason that he stared out the window. Normally, you might see 2 or 3. Omiel floated particularly close to him today. Jake's friendship with his shepherd had become strained as of late, and he avoided speaking with the creature. "When the time comes, grasp my hand," Omiel whispered to him, which alarmed Jake. He scanned the bus, but as usual, no one heard a thing. The language used by the shepherds wasn't English or Hebrew. He knew both, albeit his Hebrew was rudimentary at best, as he had only learned what he needed for his bar mitzvah. Yet he could understand the beings when they spoke. He wanted to respond, but hell, that would paint a bigger target on his back. Just as the bus driver crossed the bridge, taking them over the river, Jake saw a wall of water and storm debris rushing toward him. "Watch out!" he yelled at the driver. Instead of gunning it, the bus driver panicked and hit the brake. The water slammed into the bus, shoving them to the opposite side of the bridge. They crashed against the guardrails, breaking them like toothpicks. The bus plunged over the edge into the water with a crash, tossing students in all directions. The middle schoolers cried in fear as the bus bobbed upright in the water. The driver was slumped over the wheel, unconscious. A tree the floodwaters had ripped up torpedoed through the glass door of the bus. Water roared inside, and everyone screaming and panicking hurt to Jake's ears. He scrambled to the emergency exit, but the bus spun around in a torrent, slamming into a large debris in the underwater riverbank, tossing him into his seat. Jake was finally able to reach the window and tried to get it open. One girl, Diana, recovered her wits and helped him yank it. Diana was a serious girl who normally left him alone. Jake didn't know if it was a good idea or a bad idea to open the exit. All he knew was that staying inside the bus was a death sentence. The shepherds stayed with their charges, but again, no one could see them. He wanted to yell at them to do something, but he didn't have time. The bus was sinking quickly. The bus turned on its side and bobbed to the surface with the exit window facing upward, temporarily stopping the water gushing in the front door. The sight gave him a glimmer of hope that freedom was in sight, and they managed to get a window open. Jake helped Diana through the window first and then climbed out himself, trying to cling to the bus. He reached in to help the next student out. Student saw the open window and pressed toward the emergency exit. As he pulled a sixth grader through, the remnants of a roof slammed into the bus. The collision threw 3 children into the water and knocked the bus away from them. Jake struggled to stay above rushing floodwaters, despite repeatedly being pulled under. Something slammed into his side, hurting his left arm and piercing his leg. Something else struck his stomach, which caused him to go under. His injuries prevented Jake from breaking the surface no matter how hard he kicked and flailed. His lungs burned and he desperately wanted to inhale, but he knew that meant death. As Jake thought he was going to lose his battle, a glowing hand pierced the choppy surface of the angry water and reached for him. Jake gripped O'Meal with his good hand and held on without a second thought. The next thing he knew, Jake woke up on the side of the river, snagged on some trees with his lower half still in the water. O'Meal knelt next to him, trying to comfort him. "I am sorry, Jacob, son of Isaac. We would have saved them all if we could," he spoke mournfully. Jake's head pounded like a drum. He looked downstream and couldn't see his classmates or the bus. The water was calm, but full of debris. Jake had no clue how long he lay there, cold and hurting all over, before he grabbed a branch and pulled himself up the riverbank while his brain fought to make sense of what had happened. Jake didn't recognize his surroundings. The bank was covered in waterlogged trees, limbs, trash, and brambles. Jake fought back tears. Crying wouldn't do him any good. He needed help. Jake caught a faint whiff of smoke and peered above him. At the top of the riverbank, he saw a cabin, probably used by sportsmen who fished to the normally tranquil bend in the river. Jake crawled up the bank, calling out, "Help! Help me!" 2 men came running from the bank further downriver and helped Jake roll over and sit up. The older one of the pair exclaimed, "Holy Mother of God, I didn't see you there in the debris. Samuel, call 911. Let them know that we have an injured kid." "Okay, Dad. My phone's on the charger. I'll be right back," Samuel replied before rushing up the riverbank toward the cabin. The older man quickly assessed Jake's injuries before helping him up. The man supported Jake as they also climbed up the riverbank to the house. "You're fucking lucky that we came out of the cabin to see the damage when we did. Or we weren't down there with poles in hand when the water swept through. What's your name, son?" "I'm Gerald." Jacob Perlman." His teeth chattered as shock set in. Jake hurt all over and his abdomen ached, caked in mud from the head to toe. Jake could feel blood trickling down his leg. "All right, Jake, we got you. We'll get an ambulance here. We'll drive you to the hospital if you aren't able to make it through." Gerald got them to a deck that overlooked the river. Looking down from the height, Jake saw the utter destruction up and down the river. He must not have drifted too far because he could see where the bridge was gone. He looked to O'Meal for comfort. He stood next to Gerald's shepherd. Gerald's shepherd whispered in his charge's ear. Not that Gerald could audibly hear it. Shepherds nudge a person in one way or another through quiet prompting. The person could feel encouraged or inspired, but they would hear nothing. Jake almost spoke to the shepherd when Samuel ran out with his phone to his ear. "Dad, they're saying the dam failed and they dispatched all the EMS. They'll try to get to us ASAP, but want to know if there is any more injured." My bus went into the river." Jake struggled to think through his muddled brain. He glanced at the men, but the shock robbed him of the ability to tell any more. The 2 men stared at him with horror-struck expressions, and Samuel gripped the phone tighter. "Jesus Christ, the kid was on a school bus. Get rescuers out here now. I'm going to hand you to my dad. His name's Gerald Evans, and I'm going to grab my truck and head downstream to search for more kids." Samuel quickly handed the phone over and bolted to his truck. Gerald moved from his chair to inside the sliding glass door. Jake went numb and wondered, why me? Why not the others? He knew in his heart that they wouldn't find anyone else alive. "We stole you from death today, because we will need you soon. Your journey has just started, Jacob, son of Isaac. We will send you a coterie of stolen and companions who will join and support you in the trials ahead." O'Meal moved closer to Jake and touched him on the shoulder. With that, a sense of peace fell over Jake, but it wasn't much comfort considering his final thoughts before he lost consciousness. or of the ones who didn't make it. Some time later, he woke up in sharp pain as he was lifted onto a stretcher being taken to a waiting ambulance. The rest of the day faded into a blur as they rushed Jake into surgery due to the internal bleeding in his abdomen. They also pinned his arm and cleaned and stitched his thigh wound. The surgeon, Dr. Quincy, held Jake's hand and assured him that he'd be okay. When he looked into the man's eyes, Jake could only smile weakly and nod a thank you before the world faded into black. Jake woke again in recovery room, filled with kindly nurses and a surgeon. He wondered where his parents were as he looked about the room. "Jacob, it's good to see you awake," Dr. Quincy said in his deep, kind baritone. The man checked over Jacob's sutures. "Your parents are in the waiting room. We'll get you moved into a room and call them to see you. First, I'm going to check your stitches and get your vitals. Tell me if anything hurts and we'll get you something for the pain." The man was infinitely gentle with him. Jake's tongue felt like lead. "Hurts. Okay, Jacob. We'll give you some morphine and make you comfortable. Your parents have been worried about you. We've all been worried, and we're grateful that you're still with us. Dr. Harrelson will be in to speak with you tomorrow. You can talk to him about anything." Dr. Quincy pulled out a pen light and checked Jake's pupils and completed his exam. The surgeon then pressed a button to give Jake a dose of morphine. "You'll make a full recovery as long as you listen to our instructions and rest." Jake watched O'Meal for confirmation, and the shepherd bowed. "He is the finest at his craft. Do not worry. I have not left your side, nor will I." "O'Meal, did any of the others survive?" Jake started to feel sleepy. Dr. Quincy leaned over and held Jake's hand. "O'Meal, is that a friend?" The doctor's voice was deep with concern. "I think you need a rest. Your parents and Dr. Harrelson will talk to you tomorrow about the others." Yale, 4 years before present day. 17-year-old Yael Taub sat in her senior civics class reading her assignment choices. She needed to research an event, or events, showing a future of public policy and write a paper about the pros and cons on the role of government regarding the failure. The teacher distributed a list of potential topics. As Yael looked over the list, she noticed one about crumbling infrastructures. She tilted her head and considered it. The other option that appealed to her was the national mental health crisis. Tapping her pen on her notebook, she struggled to decide. Yale could rock both topics, and with her track meet coming up in a few days, she needed to crank this out quickly. Yale considered writing about the mental health crisis because of her svata, or grandmother in English. Svata was a Holocaust survivor, and some believed a schizophrenic. Her parents named her to honor her grandmother, Yael Weiss, who married her Saba, her grandfather, Benjamin Taub. She loved her so much and honestly had a hard time with people dismissing her delusions. Her svata talked to the creatures that she called the shepherds and was thoroughly convinced that these delusions were real, but the delusions were generally harmless. She claimed that these shepherds saved her from the Palmyra massacres and guided her through life. Svata said everyone had a shepherd who watched over them and encouraged them to do better. She told Yael stories about the shepherds in her childhood before the war. Her grandmother called Yael special and said that she had a destiny. Svata also told her about her Saba and how much they loved each other. Svata assured Yael that the shepherds would bring her a love like that. Yael often sat and listened to her grandmother's ramblings and often stayed when her Svata's friends came to visit from Switzerland. Yael liked Matthias Buhler, whom she knew to be a kind man. For a man in his early 70s, he was tall and fit, slightly balding. The man always wore horn-rimmed glasses. It was evident her Svata and Matthias had a strong bond, and they had seen things that they wouldn't dare talk about around others. When Matthias visited, they would reminisce about their time together and speak about spouses and friends. During one visit, Matthias and Svata started an intense conversation while playing cards. Yael sat on the floor, reading through her homework when Svata asked her to get them some tea. Yael intentionally snuck back in to eavesdrop on their conversation. That was when she doubted the severity of her grandmother's mental health. The old friends both spoke emphatically about the shepherds, and Matthias had mentioned that he knew that they were choosing a new Stolen. Her Svata had confirmed it and expressed hope that the new ones were as successful as they were during their tenure. Just as their conversation got more detailed, Yael's father startled her, and she knocked over a plant. The two elders immediately changed the subject by talking about Europe during the 1960s. After Matthias left and her Svata prepared for bed, Yael knocked on her door. "Svata, can I come in?" "Of course, Yael. Come right in." Her grandmother sat on the bed with her reading glasses hanging on a chain around her neck and a crossword book next to her. She regarded Yael for a moment, then squinted over Yael's shoulder. "Close the door, child." Svata patted the bed next to her. Yael always felt a shiver go up her spine when her grandmother stared at nothing. "Svata, I overheard you speaking with Matthias about shepherds. I promised to keep an open mind. Could you tell me about them?" Her Svata took her hand. "Yes, because you are special in this world, and someday you'll need to know these things. Your shepherd, Almaya, will be with you always as a guide and protector. You must learn to feel his nudges and to take his advice. Let me teach you." Bringing herself back to the present, Yael returned to the infrastructure option. Writing about mental health crisis would be a passion. But she's sensing nothing from her shepherd. Everyone knew that she had applied to several universities with fabulous psychology programs and would expect her to choose that topic. Instead, Yael racked her brain for disasters in the United States. Dam failures and bridge collapses came to mind. She remembered a dam collapse in Massachusetts when she was a child. The New Deal era dam collapsed and caused millions in damage and killed dozens of people downstream. Yael remembered her parents watching the news after dinner, the picture of the devastation and the story of the sole survivor of a bus full of kids. Images of a bus smashed in a riverbank played on the evening news. Yael feared being on the bus going over a bridge for a few months in first grade. Afterward, Yael's parents set her down to reassure her that the odds of ever seeing such a disaster were slim to none. With that memory in the back of her mind, Yael decided to forgo writing about mental health and go with the infrastructure paper using the dam break as her centerpiece.